So, since the mid-90s, as we all know, we've heard in the news, all manner of business entities have been the subject of digital espionage and intellectual property theft. So as defenders of the enterprise network, we need to become better at detecting these unwanted intrusions. Statistics show that we're getting faster at finding them, but often still too late after the data has been taken. So the goal of this presentation is to emphasize that we can catch them before they get to the data, but only if we are vigilant in looking for it, for their activities. The discipline of vigilance isn't easy and requires management to understand and approve our activities, because it is highly technical and it's often not the subject of easy measure for metrics. So therefore these activities don't often get swept aside in favor of projects and other activities that do provide and promote better metrics. So I'll try to point out along the way that if you follow these recommendations, and countermeasures, you will get to them before they get to your data. So I'll try to mix the content so that managers and technical teams both can benefit. I'm going to discuss the terminology so that we have a common language and understanding. In the overview of attacks and related defense detections, specifically registry artifacts, these registry artifacts are indicative of an attacker and an attacker's actions. They can't work by magic, so they have to hook into the registry in order to get their tools to load oftentimes. So we'll cover that, and that'll be the primary thrust of this presentation. I'm going to cover 3 stages of attack maturity, moving from the initial compromise all the way through to full data theft. And I'll make recommendations for countermeasures throughout the presentation. For the technical teams, a lot of the details I'll be discussing are contained in the 2 blog articles that I've written, and they're up on the Cylance website. These articles discuss how the registry is used to launch tools that the attack teams use in order to gain access to your networks, bypassing your millions of dollars worth of security controls and technologies. It's kind of like a state-of-the-art movie theater that has all manner of controls at the front of the building to ensure that everyone in the theater is authorized to be there after purchasing a ticket, and copious amounts of popcorn. No one has the ability to gain access without having purchased a valid ticket and have it scanned by the security scanner or the person that tears your ticket in half. But if I were able to implant the notion in someone's head that they needed to leave their seat and walk to the front of the theater and open the exit door, I could waltz right in. And that's exactly what happens in corporate enterprises everywhere. It seems like an awful lot. I won't say every day, because it doesn't happen to every company every day, but it seems to happen an awful lot. So this is what the majority of targeted attacks are about: is an email is sent to an employee who thinks the content enticing and opens the attachment or the attached file, or clicks the included web link, then starts a chain of events that culminates in the attacker essentially passing all of your controls and coming inside, because their activities are indistinguishable from those of a normal user, and therefore network controls are oftentimes not good enough. They're getting better, but they're oftentimes not good enough. So to ensure that we understand each other and keep track of what I'm going to be presenting here, I'm going to shift the point of view from the attacker or the attack team, because we're often not talking about one person here, we're talking about a full team. We're going to switch point of view from the attacker to that of the defender. And hopefully there's no attackers on this call, this webinar, it's just the defenders. So I'll use terms like attack stage or analysis phase. So I just want to make it known that when I say stage, I'm talking about the attack team activities and their level of maturity, and the phase is as defenders, it's our efforts to try to go through the process that I'll be describing. Patrick Heim, who's the CTO of Salesforce.com, recently in a book published this year, he wrote the foreword to the book, and he stated that he has met many senior security professionals, and he's noticed among them the common trait that they all have the ability to think evil, like an adversary. So that's what we're going to do today. Okay, waiting for my screen to update there. So inside the back cover of the Hacking Exposed book, there's a very useful flowchart that covers the attacker's actions, tools, and techniques. While these tools and techniques fluctuate as the attackers obtain additional capabilities, typically their methodology remains consistent. It is this pattern of actions and behaviors that we're going to focus on detecting. And until a technology comes along to aid in this, we're really the best defense there is, because humans are very good at pattern matching. Technologies are getting there, but they're not quite here yet. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through what I call stage 1, 2, and 3 of the attack. The 1 through 5 I have on the screen right now is sort of a boiling down of the Hacking Exposed flowchart. Maybe slightly different wording, but really the number 1 and 2 are done outside of your network, typically. So footprinting, reconnaissance, and scanning are done, pre-compromise. So the we're going to start really with 3 through 5. 3 is where they gain access, and this is the initial compromise. This is the email that's sent to somebody within your company. Sometimes very very craftily done, sometimes very crudely done, but nonetheless it's been successful for them for many years. So we're going to start there, and then we're going to progress as they move forward in their maturity level. The later stages, 4 and 5, are what we really want to avoid. This is the stage 3 cancer, if you will. This is the C-level manager's nightmare, and this is what we need to work to avoid. Having said that, many of our biggest name corporations have found themselves dealing with these terrible outcomes. So in the scale of 1 to 3, that's a measure of the attacker's maturity level within your organization. So while the stage is the measure of the attack team's progression towards their goal, they don't really follow these scheduled actions 100% verbatim. If they land on a machine inside your environment and they see an interesting file, they will possibly just take it right then. So data theft could be almost immediately. They can steal data at any point. Stealing smaller files is typically not a concern unless they sense that you have or see that you have certain controls in place, like DLP or document control, that would preclude them from trying to take this data. So stage 1 is all about getting inside, looking around, cataloging. The first thing they'll do is to move laterally in order to establish redundant access points as a means of increasing their hold on your enterprise. This is often where the unknown comes into our minds. We think that they've got a rat in place, but is that the only thing they have? What else have they done? So oftentimes we immediately start thinking of re-imaging the entire enterprise because we don't know. There's a lot of uncertainty once you've been breached. Remote access is really nothing without actions taken once they come inside. These actions have patterns, and the visible artifacts are what we look for. Often the first thing they'll do is clean up their exploit tools that they use to get in. They do that in order to prevent you from seeing them in your antivirus detections. They may have tuned a specific tool in order to gain initial access. Having done that, though, antivirus signatures are updated all the time, and so the last thing they want to do is have your signatures updated and then a scan run, and their tool detected, and then it tips you to the fact that they're inside. So they don't want to do that. So they want to clean that stuff up and get multiple points of entry. Then they turn their attention to looking for your data storage. So they need to find databases, application servers, SharePoint, file shares, source code repositories. They need to find where all these things are, and they may be specifically goal-driven. So if they're looking for bid data or some kind of merger information, they may just immediately go for where they think that would be, and not look at all these components. But depending on what their goal is, they're gonna inventory your environment. They're also going to look for accounts. So they need users and privileged accounts, service accounts, special database accounts, things that have access to that data in your environment, because they need to become that level of privilege in order to access it. They look at what controls and hurdles you have in place. So they oftentimes will know your antivirus before they get there. They'll look at whether you have HIPS, whitelisting, off-campus DNS abilities. All of these are things that are going to be sort of dead reckoning to find out what do you have in your environment and what can they get away with. How vigilant are you? They can sort of get a sense whether your teams are on top of it or busy elsewhere. They'll look at your infrastructure architecture. They need to know what ports are allowed outbound. Can they FTP? Can they Telnet? Where are your Active Directory domain controllers? Where are your DHCP servers? How are your IP addresses managed? They're going to look at all these things. This is all part of the campaign. Again, this is a well, I'll get to a further slide on who we are as the attackers, but then they'll progress towards stage 2, and this really has to do with taking that inventory of once they get access to where the data is, they'll inventory it. So they'll use scripts to build lists of data, specific or especially files. File shares tend to be huge, and they don't want it all. They would love to take it all, but that's impractical. So what they'll do is they'll inventory it, and then take that inventory off and build a cherry-pick script that they can come back in and grab just the parts that they need or want. They'll also continue blending in activities. So for non-Active Directory accounts, non-Windows accounts, they'll have to put in some sort of keystroke recorder, a keylogger, in order to capture privileged non-Windows accounts. They'll try to steal the entire Active Directory if they think they can get away with it. They'll obtain remote access to your infrastructure. And that kind of brings us to stage 3, where they not only will steal your data in stage 3 because they've found it, they've cherry-picked it, they've moved it to a staging location, archived it up, and they'll take it out. So that's classic stage 3 activity. But more and more they're realizing if they can get away with it, they can essentially become one of your employees by monitoring or having the ability to monitor password changes and see what's going on with your account. So really the emphasis going forward in this presentation is that difficulty in detection increases as they mature their abilities. So you want to keep what I'm going to call a vigilance cycle, and I'll talk about that in a minute. You want to be able to detect them in their early stages before they get to these more difficult to detect later stages, where there's not a lot of controls in place to detect their activities. It becomes much more difficult. So here's the vigilance cycle I alluded to just a minute ago. So the other areas of IT, come with certain reporting and compliance requirements, often legislation. Espionage does not as of yet. C-level management is often tasked with the protection of corporate data, and phrases like due diligence and do care come up, and it's part of their remit for their position. So, Sean Harris in her CISSP book, calls due diligence, continual activities that make sure the protection mechanisms are continually maintained and operational. So, due diligence is the act of investigating and understanding the risks that a company faces. And there's no more difficult area for this than targeted attacks, and call it APT, call it espionage. there's not a simple way to audit that or the ability for that. So, do care is really the act of taking corrective actions for weaknesses that you've found. And when I'm talking about the vigilance cycle, I'm talking about essentially 5 simple steps. They won't seem simple at first, but the more you get to understand them, they really do leverage they're very powerful automation techniques that can give 1 or 2 people in your environment, even if your environment is a large multinational corporation, a few people can do this on a regular basis. And that's the theme of this presentation. You need to do that on a regular basis. So it all starts with a collection in the upper right corner there. So we're gonna use collection scripts and deploy them using enterprise management tools such as SCCM, Active Directory, logon scripts, Del case, EPO. There's a lot of different methods that could be used to kick these scripts off and then collect the outputs. At Cylance, we do this with we archive up the output from these commands, and they're oftentimes only a few megs in size. And we have a number of methods, but a typical method would be to copy it to an internal file share on the corporate network. Once we have that, then we can start the assessment phase. So you can, and these are things you can do yourself. We can help train you to do them. You can learn to do them yourself. So we want to parse this data into a SQL database. And then we can use just simple SQL queries and Excel to analyze that data. Now, the analysis of that data is going to create questions, and the first time through it's going to create a lot of questions. But if you keep up with it and you go through it numerous times, the questions will become more and more meaningful because you'll have less and less false positives or unexplained anomalies. And then when you do have those unexplained anomalies, you can clean them up in the next phase so that you don't come across them again in the future. And then that gives you a clearer picture based on activities you're seeing in your environment. How well are your controls working? Where are the gaps that you need to provide either additional controls or better manage and get more out of your existing controls? And we'll talk obviously about the defense phases, which the vigilance cycle I just covered is really phase 1 of the defense activities. So you're going to build that database, and you're going to continue going through the vigilance cycle, which is designed to find compromise activities. It's very lightweight. I've been doing this for quite a while, and there's never been any complaint of slowness or performance issues either on the network with the files being copied or on the individual endpoints with the scripts run.
Hey Scott, this is really the cool stuff. This is the money shot stuff in terms of showing them how to actually be practical on all of it. So I want to make sure they kind of focus on this phase of it. One of the things though, Scott, I think is your cell phone kind of near the speaker or anything? Because we're getting some feedback. If your cell phone is on, you might want to just, it's like that little speaker bug thing that happens. If not, then it must be someone else's. But
I don't think so. I just took mine out of my bag and threw it across the room. So
okay, perfect. Okay,
we're good to go.
Well, all right, thanks. All right, keep going. This is good. This is it.
Okay.
Good stuff.
Okay, so then phase 2 is really you take actions in phase 2 based on what you find out in phase 1, and phase 2 oftentimes just helps you answer questions. So whether they're legitimate concerns or just unanswered anomalies, phase 2 helps you get there. And phase 1 really is the broad 20,000 foot picture of your entire enterprise. Phase 2 is going to be just a very small number of machines. And then once you see indicators in phase 2 that are troubling to you, then you move into full forensics in phase 3. So that's kind of the overview where we're at. So we're going to do a little thought experiment here, nothing too complex. We're going to think like the attackers. I'll show that in red, and then we'll turn right around and think about the defenders and look at areas where we can counter the attackers' actions. So as attackers, who are we? We're state-sponsored teams. I sometimes to say attacker, we're not talking about a single person. We're talking about a building full of people. And in that building full of people, you may have 2 or 3 different stages or teams within that take different stages of their attack as their they're part of the pie. So they may be the compromise team. They may turn it over to the data team. And they may turn it over to the exfiltration team. So earlier this year, we had the APT1 report. Sort of tipped or raised the curtain so we can see that it's the People's Liberation Army, and they're using digital espionage tradecraft. We've all heard the names. You've heard APT, Shady Rat. That's really what we're talking about here. We're not talking about anonymous types and trying to do sabotage on the network. That's a different problem altogether. Okay, so attack stage 1. So we have our black hats on here. We're the attackers. So we have a couple of options. We can either, the simplest option is to purchase access from a botnet controller, sometimes what's called a catalog operator. These guys sell seats inside corporations at different levels of privilege. So this gives me the ability to immediately get to work. And this would be the choice of that you would want as an attacker if you're after some very timely data. So if you're in a competitive bid against a company and you need that data quickly, this might be an option you want to choose. Merger information, very timely, and so forth. Otherwise, if you're going to do a DIY attack, which is pretty much what they've done all in the past through like March of this year, is you want to use social engineering techniques. And this takes quite a bit of effort on their part. So they have to identify targets on the inside who would likely have a certain interest in something like a conference or a certain technical topic. And they'll send attachments or links. They'll set up a watering hole site, which is, watering hole is really just a target audience site where information that audience, that a target audience would have interest in. So in the oil field, if you're a reservoir engineer, you might go to a website that has news about oil reservoir information. And if that company that runs that site isn't all that good with their security, the attackers can get on there and implant various exploits. So that's quite often used. Council for Foreign Relations is an example of that from earlier this year. They were compromised, and it was termed a watering hole attack. So this can take literally months to get a successful implantation on a corporate network. So they also need a method of persistence. Once they get that initial click to bring in the compromise, they need a way of staying on the system. So, and I'll switch back my point of view here to the attacker. It's kind of hard to stay in that mode, but so what we need as the attacker is we want to get something to run as system. That would be the optimum. So if we have an exploit that can give us system level rights, that's what we want. We want to hook into the operating system so that our code runs at startup. We don't want to have to wait around for users to log in. We want it to be available immediately. Think of Wake on LAN. I may have access to a machine and that machine goes off. If I have access to a secondary machine, like a workstation that stays on all the time, and I can issue Wake on LAN, I can then wake up my other supplicant machines across the network. So the Windows is the primary place for persistence. It's a maze of complex values that almost no one looks at. Some of your more experienced Windows administrators do look at it, but you know, it's hard to see patterns of misuse in all of that data that's stored in there. So it's a very easy means of persistence, especially in the early stages. Okay, and that's the slide I just went through. I'm sorry, I must have not advanced it. So now I'm talking about going into the defender mode, and we talked about the vigilance cycle, and that's you know, very important, because if we're doing these periodic cyber health assessments, we'll start seeing anomalous behavior even during that first compromise. So, you know, we have a lot of uh, issues with malware and viruses on corporate networks. I mean, it's just a reality of life, especially if you have laptop users. They go out, they come back, and they bring in all sorts of detections. So we have a lot of noise, and but the pattern that you see on the when you do the vigilance cycle, when you do a pre-response assessment, what you're going to see that's different is you're going to start seeing behaviors that typical malware doesn't have. Um, Typical malware doesn't log in and use user profiles. So I would recommend initially doing this monthly, and then when you get used to it, then doing it quarterly, and I'd never do it less than semi-annually. Um, and be proactive in neutering your botnets. So this is one countermeasure you can do. You know, botnets are a pain. You know, Sality, Configure, all these other, you know, botnets, they're a pain, but you know, there are ways you can neuter them using network controls. You know, implement DNS sinkholing and keep up with you know, sinkhole lists. There are ones you can subscribe to that try to keep up with them as well. Take actions with your IPS, you know, and network traffic controls that you have. Look at your antivirus signatures, but more importantly, you're probably going to look at your HIPS rules, host firewall, web filters. If you have a host DNS sinkholing capability, that's awesome, because your laptop users are on and off your network. So you may be blocking them with your enterprise fire or sinkholes, but as soon as they go home or get on a public hotel type network, um, the software on the botnet software is going to be updating itself, because they realize that, you know, there's this huge time when they're not communicating with their endpoint, so they're going to update it to something you probably don't know about. So host-based controls are really good, but there's not a whole lot of them out there. So you want to minimize the attack surface also by doing patching. And with the Adobe release that just happened recently with their source code, you really want to keep up with the Adobe patches. So the dropper downloader, which is the first stage, when you click on something, the dropper downloader is the first thing that comes down, and it's going to embed itself in the run keys. And I have a whole list of run keys in my technical blog article in the order in which they're executed. Another favorite is boot execute. You know, boot execute is fun because it launches a DLL into every process that runs, and it's quite noisy, and because of that noise, you may not see it in targeted attacks, but the run keys are until they can get to the level of having a service installed, which is typically what you have with a remote access Trojan or tool, known as a RAT. That here in this case, they'll use a hosted service that runs with the SVC host, and you know, the SVC host has a concept called permission segmentation groups, and the one that gives the services the most access to the network is net SVCS. So they'll often use that group to launch their utilities. Once you have that in your environment, it's easy to find if you know what to look for. It's challenging if you don't. And the reason for that is they're not doing anything really malicious at that point. Um, your your antivirus may catch it, but only if it has signatures for it. So know your hosted DLLs. It's not insurmountable in the method that I'm discussing here about gathering information with scripts to build over time, build an understanding of what your hosted DLLs are. And then you can do a frequency count of the occurrence of these across your entire Windows estate. And these low frequency DLLs, as we call them, should be investigated, understood, and documented, because really that's where they're going to show up if they're using this technique. So what does this look like when you look at it on an individual endpoint? This screenshot shows the registry of a machine in which a bogus DLL is configured to load as a hosted services. You can't see it in the screenshot, but this one is running in SVC host in the aforementioned NetSVC group, which gives it certain permissions. This is what they want in a RAT, and in this case, it's the RAZ Auto 16.dll, which is really that stands for Remote Access Auto Connection Manager. If you do a Google search on that DLL name, it's all bad. It's been used various places, mostly targeted attacks or heavily with targeted attacks. So if you know what's normal in your environment and what's not, that'll stand out pretty quickly. So, but you don't want to go around, 60,000 machines in your environment and do this. So, excuse me. So in the vigilance cycle, when you gather that scripts in the collection phase and you build your database and do the assessment, this is an example of what you'll see. So in this third query down here, and as I mentioned, these SQL queries are not anything rocket science. They're if you don't know SQL, they may seem foreign to you at first, but really they're quite easy and easily modified from a given starting point. So in this situation, this was a case that we were working where the WinSock DLL, which is this WS2_32, we saw running in a directory called tools in various places. So by writing this SQL query, as well as the RAZ Auto 16, we can turn around and then look in the environment everywhere we have the collection scripts, and we can find, oops, I'm highlighting the wrong one. We can find, it's running on the desktop under tools. And then once you have that information, you can oftentimes turn around and look at the exact file size in bytes, or bits, excuse me. And with that file size, you can turn around and find the same file under a different name. So they may have changed the DLL name to something else, but the file size will stay the same because these are not encrypted. Typically, they may be obfuscated, but they're not packed. These are just tools that they're using. You can also use the date time oftentimes because they're not trying to date stomp these things to where you can't see them. They may do that, and some of their tools have the ability to do that automatically, but sometimes they don't, and you can use the date time as well. So there's a lot of information contained in this. As you can see, we get directory information back, we get network information back. I'm on the left side of the screen there. I know there's a lot of information here. I don't know if you can see it. I'll put a big arrow there. So we got registry information, we got network information, we got directory information. It's really the kind of stuff that you would look for if you were an incident responder sitting in front of a computer. So it's extraordinarily powerful. Economy of scale, I think, is the term I've heard used with that. It gives you much more power than you probably even knew you had at your disposal. So
yeah, and this is what we've seen too, Scott, with very, very large organizations, is that this kind of I guess you call it a thin touch in a very large scale, makes it highly scalable, where you can do quick analysis on tens and hundreds of thousands of systems with these kinds of techniques. So if you are in a large organization and find that a lot of other methodologies and tools require way too much impact on the end node, as well as just simply hooking into too much stuff to find that needle in the haystack. These techniques have proven time and again to be hugely successful and high performance.
Yeah, and you know, when I was an incident responder at a enterprise, corporate enterprise, I dreamed of having the ability to see into all of the service DLLs across the entire enterprise. You're going to get a lot of information back, but when you pull this into Excel and do a frequency analysis, you're gonna come up with a handful of stragglers, and when you investigate those stragglers, then that's where you're going to start finding your anomalous systems that you need to look into. It's sort of like an enterprise luminol test. If you're familiar with like CSI shows, it gives you that light that you can shine in your enterprise and find the tracks where the intruders had been. It's really, really powerful. So these are the run keys and the order of loading. I figure this isn't really good information for a webinar if you want people to stay awake. So I refer you again to the technical blog to get the details on all of these. But this is where they run, and they, you know, obviously they're going to want to pick an HQ local machine because that's going to run when the system boots versus a current user Hive. So this screenshot shows this RAT DLL technique from an actual incident I've worked around the 2010-2011 timeframe. So really what they did is they injected this into a NetSVC permissions group, and if you notice in the bottom pane down here, they didn't use or they don't use any information in the description or company name fields. So right away that's going to be suspect. Now they may change that that practice, so that's not always a given, but once you find that they've injected a DLL, then you can oftentimes go into the memory strings and you can come across their command and control domain names. You can come across other DLLs they might be using on your system that you didn't know about. And once you know these command and control domains, then you can use your DNS sinkhole or other network controls to quickly find. Web filtering is a good one for that. So you can quickly, you know, find where they've been on your network and what other machines they have access to. So now they're inside. Now what do they do? So during, you know, they've learned the environment. They've identified the storage locations. They've identified the credentials they need to obtain, and they've probably identified an established operating base for where they're going to collect their data. Some of the things they'll do on the inside that you'll want to look for in your analysis is they'll run standard Windows commands. Some of them might be WMIC. They might be looking to see, have you renamed the administrative account? That's a technique that some people use. They'll create a new administrator account under a different name, and then they'll disable the built-in administrator account. So what they're doing is they're enumerating SIDs looking for what you're using for your administrative account on that specific machine. They're also looking at who they're on the machine as. You know, if they end up on the machine as a user, they'll do things like, you know, use who am I, and they might use tools to harvest clear text passwords off the machine. That's ultimately their prime goal, is to get clear text passwords, because they can be heavily used for things that you can't do something like pass the hash with. So as they go through your entire network, you know, they're looking for machines like, say, this machine here at the bottom, the center, you know, that has a drive mapping to a NAS or some kind of network share. So what they'll do is they'll PSExec to those individual machines if they have the rights to it, and then they'll just do a directory listing for all drives, and they'll just dump it into a file and take that out. So we've seen that a lot of times. So that's part of their cataloging activities. So we can tell when we're seeing the date times on those kind of things, we're looking at stage 1 activities. They're inventorying. And this is an example of how this actually looks from a compromise So this guy wasn't a very good scripter, so he just rather than using a loop, he just hard coded all of the possible drive letters into the file and just ran it. Uh, you know, the advanced and advanced persistent threat doesn't necessarily indicate their skill. Um, so these are activities that they'll try to glean information on. Um, they'll also look to move to more lateral machines within the environment to identify where the data is located. Sometimes they can't get access to certain data from the machines they already have access to, so they have to move on to other machines. They need to identify who these users are, and sometimes, like I alluded to earlier, if the passwords they need are not Windows passwords, they'll need to set up keyloggers and the ability to get to those recorded keystrokes in order to get the information. I worked on one of those just earlier this year, where a scientist had a keystroke logger on his machine. So again, to the defenses and the countermeasures, this doesn't have to do with registry, but looking at the prefetch files is really important, and we do gather that the metadata for prefetch during our directory listing. So you have the prefetches on all your workstations. By default, prefetch is not enabled on servers, so unless you've enabled it, it's not going to give you any information there. But most likely they're moving around on your workstations way before they move around on your servers. So um, you start seeing this pattern of activities, that normal users don't do. Who am I, GP result, WMI. They don't use WMI commands typically, or WMIC, unless the machine you're looking at is an experienced Windows administrator. Then you might immediately understand what the issue is. But link files also show very similar file usage on the newer Windows. This is what a typical compromise timeline would look like. And I'm not going to go through this in great detail, but the newest stuff is at the bottom, and it gets older as you go towards the top. So just by looking at this, we see this this WinSock driver in a wrong location. WS232 DLL shouldn't be loaded out of a directory other than the Windows System32 or the cache or side-by-side directories. And then we see some of these other odd, .ax files. Probably want to grab a sample of those, and we did in this case. This is interesting. They brought on their own tools and threw them in the recycle bin. So they're using a couple commands here that they brought along with them, including psexec and nurseoff's @now command, which helps you create scheduled tasks or tasks, jobs. They also downloaded FileZilla, and you can tell from the bitmap caches here that they did some RDP activity. And then, and you can see the time change here. These dates have been modified to protect the innocent, but the distance between the activities is about the same. So you can start seeing here that you've got some time to work. If you're doing your due diligence and you're looking at this stuff, you're going to catch it down here. You're going to start catching why is RAR in the recycle bin. Why did psexec show up in January after the holidays? What's going on? So you're going to get them before a month later, almost a month and a half later, or a month and a couple days later, they get to your data. They start taking stuff out. I've actually got copies of all these batch scripts, and what they're doing is they're archiving stuff into the recycle bin to take it away. So I've covered this pretty much. So we're going to look at you as defenders. What can you do? You need to have your SOC and your CERT have the capability of alerting on high-level account profile creation. You can do this with, for example, EPO. You can have EPO if you schedule configure ntuser.dat to be a PUP, but not blocked, just alerted. In an environment 60,000 users that have been there for quite a few years, you're not going to have an overwhelming amount of ntuser.dats created every day, or at least you shouldn't. And if you know the high value ones, like your Active Directory domain administrators or your scientists in your environment, they really should only be logging into the handful of machines that they use on a regular basis. Um, have your help desk clean up their profiles after they log in and do work. That will help find movement of your help desk personnel if their accounts are misused or stolen. Use password vaulting. That's an excellent one. That's going to slow them down quite a bit. This method I talk about on the slide called hook and pull. It's really fast and efficient if you have the same administrator account across your entire enterprise. That I can move from one machine to 20 or 30 in just a matter of a very short time. And when I do that, I'm moving my tools and my capabilities. If you have a unique administrator password that uses vaulting, then that's going to slow them down quite a bit, significantly, and that's going to give you time, because you're being vigilant, to catch this and get them out of your network before they have a chance to steal data. So this is the hook and pull I was talking about. What they're going to do is create a command on a remote machine, because they have administrative rights over there, and that command is going to essentially copy a utility from the machine I'm currently on and then run it. And we see them use this net time, so they're looking to see what the time difference is. Because if you're a large multinational corporation, the local time is what they need. So they'll do net time and look to see what the time is on the machine they're interested in, because they have no idea where it is in the world until they figure out your naming scheme. So they'll do something like this to run Mimikatz or WCE. They'll start a keylogger DLL in order to capture non-Windows passwords, like I mentioned before. So back as the attacker, we're doing data browsing and collecting. So what we're going to do here is we're going to look to see, what machine has plenty of disk space and isn't watched a lot. So network teams out there, you guys may have like servers that you use for network information. Sometimes they even sit in DMZs, or they just sort of get stood up and not the same rigorous controls are applied to them as the rest of the enterprise. So just take a look in your environment as an attacker and see, what would be key machines that have a lot of hard drive space that they could work from. So on the defense side, you're going to look for use of Xcopy and copy. Really, most normal users don't use Xcopy or copy. And then, of course, you also want to look for these other archive tools, RAR, zip, 7-zip. And then in your recycle bins, oftentimes, but not always, you'll see RAR files created, and they're lazy. So what they'll do is they'll use a single letter, like a.rar, and then if it's multi-part, it'll create the other parts of it. So they use short names to minimize their typing. And then in the exfiltration, oftentimes if they use RAR, they'll use what's called encrypted headers. And I've actually captured the batch file in which they created an exfiltration, and I was able to use that to get access to the RAR'd up files and then show the enterprise what it was that was taken, and that's very sobering, because you don't always get this. This shows we were pretty quick on their heels, and they didn't have a chance to come back in and clean up. So I imagine it goes like this: if you exfiltrate the data, you probably have a big party and you get a bonus check or something, and you're maybe a week or two later before you get back in and clean up. So knowing data is taken is excellent. That means you're on their heels. So the only lessons learned from this perspective is that you can learn from your mistakes and what it takes to be faster at your analysis. If you've been vigilant, where did your capability sensors or visibility fail to provide indicators? Where did you lose sight? And then, recovery is not easy, but it is essential. You want to find all of the artifacts and clean them out of your environment so that they don't trigger you again in the future with unnecessary concerns. You've cleaned them out. So I've run into this in incident responses where we come across rat DLLs. We go to look for them on the file system and they're gone. And that's because they cleaned them off the system, but they didn't remove the registry entry. So you want to go and make sure you understand what it is you're looking for in your analysis and what it takes to clean it up. So that's a lot to go through in a very short time. So I hope I haven't lost anybody. But again, I'll say it again. I know you're all going to scream at me for repeating myself, but this cycle of vigilance is really your best defense, and it tells you how your controls are working and where your gaps need to be improved. Cylance, we offer training for this for your entire teams. We're more than willing to share this technology. If you feel you've been compromised or have a situation that you can't explain, we'll come in and do it for you. We do that every day. So thank you very much for your attendance, and I guess we'll take questions now.
Thanks, Scott. Yeah, I appreciate you running through all of that, kind of giving your perspective in the field. It's always helpful, even though a lot of the stuff is not super elite in terms of what was demonstrated. It is real blocking and tackling and bread and butter when it comes to trying to track down these guys. So if you have any questions, well, first off, that we've got resources that you can find this information later on. Also subscribe to our Twitter feed, Hack the Exposed, if you haven't already, as well as you can subscribe to Cylance Inc. And in terms of questions, if you just look at your tab and you can punch in any questions that you have on it with Scott or myself. If you've got any great ideas for next webinar, we'd love to take those in. So we had a question, let's see, pop up. Are you guys planning on releasing any books on this approach along the lines of the folks at Mandiant and others? We thought a lot about it. It certainly, I think, could warrant a book. It is a different approach by far, and it does take into far more reaching indicators than you would traditionally hear about from the Mandiants of the world. It's not just about malware or files, but it's about looking at all of the behaviors of the bad guys, the lateral movement, the hijacking of privilege escalation, things of the nature, just misuse in general. And there are a lot of, I think, tips and tricks that we can share on that front, and we'll definitely take that in and try and get Scott to write a book on it. How about that, Scott?
I feel like I already have.
Yeah, no, I know, and that's how Hacking Exposed got started. I just was doing so much pen test work and red teaming and advanced kind of exploit development to bypass a lot of the controls we were seeing, and I just had been collecting this stuff for so many years, and everybody kept asking, well, how did you do this, and how did you get by that control and this firewall, and et cetera, and it got to the point of such an avalanche of information that I couldn't even recall in many cases how we explicitly did that and made that successful exploitation, for example. And so by documenting it all throughout the years, I came to the point where I'm like, gosh, I really got to put this in a book, and so that's how it happened. So I think you could probably take a lot of your in-field experience and build enough content for a book, and we could do it electronically, so we don't have to worry about the print publishers being out of date. All right. Yeah, time for another one is now. Yeah, I appreciate it. All right. Well, I think, we've got a lot of comments around just great content, and I really appreciate that. I appreciate everybody's attendance. I'll give you the next few minutes off, and you guys can we have one last question here. Can you show the blog address again? Yeah, if you go to cylance.com, you'll see it under technical blog, but you can also, I don't know if, Scott, if you're going to show it, but basically you go to cylance.com, go to technical blog under labs, and you'll find it there. All right, gang, we're going to go ahead and end it now. Thanks so much for everybody's attendance, and we'll look to get you some killer content for next month or two. Have a great holidays if we don't talk before then. Thanks, everyone. Bye.